Audrey looked up at the sky and sighed. She had stepped outside just 10 minutes ago, and at that time there wasn't a single cloud in the sky, but now the first drops of rain had started to fall. The air was filled with a scent of dampness. She didn't need to be a weather forecaster to guess that her light summer dress would be soaked in a matter of minutes. Immediately she wanted to go back home, but she couldn't. Soon Addie and Tracey would wake up and want to eat, and as the eldest, Audrey had to look after them, including finding food. "Well, there's not much left," Audrey muttered to herself and quickened her pace. She had almost reached the large backyard, almost filled with rows of tall garbage bins. Audrey had discovered this place quite accidentally. Once a week there was a display of food, almost with end-of-life expiration dates, and anyone could pick it up. She just had to be quick. First, many homeless people knew about it, and secondly, a truck was going to come in an hour to pick up what was left for disposal. This time Audrey made it. She quickly threw an old, worn-out backpack off her shoulder. Its straps had been sewn countless times. She had sewn them herself, so she knew that the backpack could hold at least 10 kilograms without tearing. Today's haul was good. 2 packs of cottage cheese with sour cream. Tracey loves them. A pack of chicken thighs, a pack of peaches in syrup, a can of condensed milk, and a large pack of tomato juice. When the haul was stuffed into the backpack, which would be quite heavy to carry, Audrey headed back. If she hurried, she could make it home before the rain started in earnest. Suddenly, something in one of the bins caught her attention. Audrey came up and pulled out a strange wallet. It was bright green, like spring grass, and had a bright pink flower stuck to the front, with petals made of braided threads. "Well, well," Audrey said and opened it. Inside were several $100 bills. Audrey gasped. They could live on this for a month. Besides the money, the wallet contained only a small old coin. Who could have lost such a strange wallet? Audrey looked around, hid the wallet in her inner pocket of her backpack, put the backpack on her shoulder, and headed towards home. The place where they all lived couldn't really be called a home. They called it that more out of habit, and perhaps to maintain the illusion that they actually had a home. In fact, it was part of an old district of the city, an old district. There stood several wooden houses where there used to be a stove heating system. About 15 years ago, these houses were deemed unfit for habitation. The residents were resettled and the huts were supposed to be demolished to build a new high-rise residential complex in their place. But during the analysis of the area, it became clear that the conditions were entirely unsuitable, making the construction of new houses unjustifiably expensive. Thus, the old houses were left undisturbed. Besides Audrey, Addie and Tracey, a few other homeless individuals also resided there. Electricity in the uninhabited district had long been cut off, leaving only stoves for warmth. Fuel came from nearby trees or dilapidated houses that were no longer fit for living. Some people had been residing there for over a decade. Audrey discovered this place about a year ago. Before that, they had taken refuge in basements, shelters, and other places unsuitable for small children. Audrey was now 21 years old. Addie was 12, and Tracey was only 9. The younger ones were siblings, while Audrey was not related to them, but she loved and cared for them as if they were her own. Audrey herself had grown up in an orphanage. She had no memories of her parents, and the caretakers never told her how she ended up there, or if she had any other relatives. Audrey had no fond memories of the orphanage, and when she turned 16 she ran away and began living on the streets. Life would have been very difficult for her if she had not met Henry. This old man noticed her, freezing at the train station, where she had been staying for nearly a week with barely any food. Henry took her in, and from then on they travelled together, rarely staying in one place for more than a few weeks. Audrey enjoyed this nomadic life. Henry seemed to know every city they visited. When Audrey asked how he became homeless, he would simply shrug. "That's just how life turned out, dear," he would say. Henry believed that life, fate or the universe knew better than people.
"Pay attention to the signs," he taught Audrey. "They are everywhere. If you listen to your intuition, you will never be lost."
He claimed that this was how he met Audrey.
"I was planning to go to a different station that day, but then something told me to go to this station instead. That's how we met."
Initially, Audrey was sceptical of Henry's words. She thought that signs, astrology and fortune-tellers were all deceits. Yet Henry's intuition never seemed to fail him. Once, for instance, he woke Audrey in the middle of the night and said they had to leave.
"Where to, Henry?"
Audrey protested sleepily. "Let's sleep several more hours and then go." But the old man sighed and shook his head firmly.
"We have to go, Audrey. I sense trouble coming."
There were several such incidents. Each time, Audrey would sigh but get up. A day or two later, they would hear through the grapevine that a brawl had broken out in the shelter they had left, or the police had raided it, or a fire had occurred. "How do you do it?" Audrey asked her companion. "What's your secret?" The old man would just shrug.
"There's no special secret, and I don't have any magical intuition. I think everyone has this feeling. Most people just suppress it, but I prefer to listen to it."
Audrey lived with Henry for 3 whole years. Then the old man caught a cold, fell ill and passed away. Audrey cried for a long time, and then she wiped away her tears, gathered her belongings, and moved on, guided by her inner intuition. Less than a week later, she met Addie and Tracey. Their fate was similar to hers. The siblings had ended up in an orphanage when Tracey was barely a year old and Addie was 4. They always tried to stay together, with Addie taking care of her sister. But a few years later, when Addie was 11 and Tracey was 8, a family wanted to adopt Tracey alone, without her brother. That's when they ran away.
"I was aware that they would take her in,"
Addie later told Audrey.
"I wanted her to have a better life, but Tracey cried all day. She said if they took her away alone, she would run away and look for me. I couldn't put her in such danger. Together we could at least protect each other. I would keep her safe."
It's uncertain how long the children could have survived on the streets alone, or what dangers they might have faced if they hadn't met Audrey. She decided it was fate and took them under her wing, just as Henry had once done for her. Soon they found this abandoned neighbourhood. They chose a small, unassuming but sturdy house and made it their home. From Henry, Audrey had learned to light the stove and cook. She taught Addie and Tracey everything she knew. They mainly took care of the household, while Audrey was responsible for finding food and clothing. Deep down, Audrey believed that this situation was temporary. She held on to the hope that better days were ahead, trusting her intuition, as Henry had taught her. Now she had found this strange wallet. After feeding the children, Audrey retreated to her corner of the house. Their small home was divided into personal spaces, using old sheets hung from nails in the ceiling. "We have a 4-room apartment," Addie had joked. 3 bedrooms and a living room." "Yes," Audrey had replied. "Too bad the bathroom is outside." Audrey climbed onto her bed and drew the makeshift curtains. She was determined to find the wallet's owner, though she wasn't sure how. The money inside would have been enough for them to live on for almost a month, but she remembered Henry's words.
"Not all benefits are obvious. Sometimes you have to dig a little deeper to gain more than you initially see."
Audrey sighed and examined the wallet again. This time she noticed a small, almost hidden pocket inside. She opened it and found a small business card. On the expensive, thick black card, golden letters spelled out an address. Audrey didn't know where the street was, but she guessed that this address could lead her to the wallet's owner. The next day, Audrey spent a long time searching for the right street. Finally, she realised that the house she needed was in a different part of the city, a wealthy district with large private homes. Luck was on her side that day. She slipped past the security guard, stepped over the lowered barrier, and walked along the long, deserted streets. It was almost noon, and the heat was becoming unbearable, which might explain the lack of people. When Audrey reached the house, she paused, unsure of what to do next. A high metal fence hid the house from view, and the gate was closed. She spotted a doorbell and, after a moment's hesitation, pressed it. Almost a minute passed before a stern, dry voice came through the intercom.
"Who is that?"
Audrey took a deep breath and replied, "I found your wallet."
"What wallet?"
"A green glossy one with a bright knitted flower. There was an old coin inside." There was a heavy sigh from the intercom.
"Come in,"
the man said. There was a beep and the gate clicked open slightly. Audrey stepped inside. Behind the fence stood a modern house, not overly large but clearly new. A man stood on the porch, frowning at Audrey. He appeared to be in his late 30s or early 40s, with light auburn hair and a beard, both streaked with grey. His blue eyes watched her from behind thin metal-framed glasses. Despite the heat, he wore a plaid shirt and dark blue jeans.
"Where did you find it?"
the man asked. "In a dumpster behind the store," Audrey replied.
"And what were you doing in a dumpster?"
Audrey blushed. The man nodded as if the answer was obvious. Audrey suddenly became acutely aware of her worn-out sneakers, faded dress and patched backpack. She silently handed him the wallet. He took it, opened it, and grunted.
"Did you ever consider," he continued, "that if someone throws away a wallet full of money, they might not want it back?"
Audrey raised her eyebrows in surprise. "So you threw it away on purpose?" He nodded. "But why?"
He frowned. "The real question is, why did you return it? Especially with the money. It's clear you need it more than I do. Even if you're sentimental, you could have returned the wallet and said there was no money in it."
"At first I wanted to do just that, but then I felt it would be right to return it to its owner. I believe in doing what feels right." The man sighed and took off his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. This simple gesture made him seem less stern.
"Well, well," he said, "another believer in fate. Come inside, then."
He gestured invitingly, and Audrey, after a moment's hesitation, followed him. Inside, everything was made of wood, cosy and clean.
"What's your name?"
the man suddenly asked. "Audrey."
"And I'm Colin Hartman. Nice to meet you. By any chance, do you need a job?"
Audrey tensed and blushed. "I'm not that kind of person. I need money, but not enough to do anything dishonest." The man sighed and rolled his eyes.
"You're not my type. Are you even 18? I need a housekeeper. My previous one just quit, and it's difficult to find a good replacement."
Audrey eyed him suspiciously. "And you'll just hire me off the street?"
"You're smart. You found me, after all, and you're honest. Since you decided to return what you could have kept, also determined, since you made it here, and besides, I believe in fate. If this wallet came back to me through you, there must be a reason."
Audrey pondered. Despite his apparent sternness, she sensed no danger from Mr. Hartman. Over the years of living on the streets, she had learned to recognize people to avoid. He was not one of them. "What will I have to do?" Audrey asked.
"Nothing complicated. Cook my meals, clean the house, go shopping. Every weekday."
Audrey thought about it. She needed the work. Tracey and Addie were old enough to manage during the day without her. And in the future? Who knows? Maybe she could save enough money to rent a proper place for the three of them. "I agree," Audrey said.
"Then it's a deal."
Audrey cautiously shook his outstretched hand. The homeowner took all the money from the wallet and handed it to Audrey.
"This is an advance. Buy yourself some decent clothes and shoes. If security stops you, tell them to call me. I'll confirm everything. I expect you tomorrow at 8 in the morning. Understood?"
Audrey nodded, her heart pounding. "Yes, I'll be there," she murmured.
I just still can't believe this is happening. Thank you."
"Don't thank me yet. Just don't be late, Audrey."
Audrey didn't spend all the money from her new employer right away. Who knows how things might turn out? Of course, she bought food for the children: grains, pasta, canned meat, sausages, tea, milk, a pack of cookies and a bag of candy. Without a refrigerator or electricity, they stored perishables in the basement. Audrey also finally updated their wardrobes, finding 3 decent pairs of sneakers at a second-hand store. She bought Addie jeans, shorts and a couple of t-shirts, and several dresses for Tracey. "You'll be okay without me, right?" she asked the children that evening as they tried on their new clothes.
"Of course," Addie replied indignantly. "We're grown-ups."
"Maybe, if you have a job, you can adopt us," Tracey asked dreamily. Though the youngest, she often thought about adult matters, more than Audrey and Addie combined.
"Yeah, right," Addie scoffed. "Audrey is only 21 and we don't have a place to live. Besides, I doubt a housekeeper earns enough to support 3 people.
Audrey sighed. "I'll probably be working off the books," she said. "I don't have any documents." Tracey's face fell. Noticing this, her brother quickly put a hand on her shoulder.
"Everything will be fine,"
he said firmly. Audrey smiled and said, "Just in case, I'll write down the address and draw a map of how to get there, and I'll leave some money." The next morning the guard noticed her.
"Who are you here to see, young lady?" he asked sternly.
Audrey stopped. What if Mr. Hartman was just playing a joke on her, and she was about to be thrown out in disgrace?
"Who are you here to see, young lady?"
the man repeated loudly, with irritation in his voice. "I'm here to see Mr. Hartman," Audrey replied.
"Ah, then go ahead, he warned me,"
the guard said. Audrey nodded and hurried inside. As soon as she pressed the familiar doorbell button, the gate opened almost immediately, as if they had been waiting for her. Audrey took a deep breath and entered.
"Well, you're not late," Colin said approvingly. "Have you had breakfast?"
Audrey nodded uncertainly. She had left the house early, and the stove, their only means of cooking, hadn't been lit yet.
"I see," the homeowner sighed. "Let's go to the kitchen and I'll show you everything."
There, they quickly figured out how to use the cooker, microwave, and other appliances. Although Audrey had seldom used any of these before, she quickly understood how everything worked. Within half an hour, 2 large mugs of steaming coffee, 2 plates of fluffy omelette, and several crispy cheese and bacon toasts were on the table.
"Well, now that we've eaten, we can get to work,"
the homeowner said cheerfully. He gave Audrey a brief tour, showing her the rooms and explaining what needed to be done in each.
"A good cleaning wouldn't hurt," he concluded cheerfully. "I've been without help for a while. The only thing you shouldn't touch is my desk. I'll take care of that myself. I'll be working in the garden. If you have any questions, find me there."
He took his laptop and left. Audrey tied her hair back in a bun and gathered all the necessary cleaning supplies from the closet under the stairs. She had never cleaned such a house before. Her own place could barely be called a home. She and the kids would mop the floors, sweep, and sometimes wash the windows, all without any cleaning products, just old rags and a bit of baking soda. Audrey had great respect for baking soda. It could clean almost anything. She had also worked as a cleaner a few times, usually in technical rooms or cafeterias. Once she worked in a roadside cafe for almost 2 weeks, but the owner started harassing her. Audrey told Henry about it that same evening. He frowned and said she wouldn't go back there. The next morning they packed their things and left for another city. A few years later, when Audrey returned to that city alone, she learned that the cafe had burned down in a fire. It happened the very night after she and Henry left the city. Cleaning turned out to be not as difficult as she thought. It was clear that Mr. Hartman lived alone, and apart from dust, there was no other dirt in the house. However, in his office, There were framed photos on the walls. One of them caught Audrey's attention. Mr. Hartman had his arm around an attractive blonde woman with grey eyes, and in front of them stood a girl of about 10. That must be his wife and daughter, Audrey thought, and naturally she wondered where Mr. Hartman's wife and daughter were now. Maybe they lived in the city, or were they away on vacation? Audrey didn't touch the desk, but glanced at it and saw a pile of crossed-out documents with notes in red pencil in the margins. She couldn't help but look, and realised it seemed to be a script for a movie or TV show. "Are you a screenwriter?" Audrey asked her boss when she went into the garden to call him for lunch. He looked up at her absently, and his eyes behind his glasses flashed with annoyance. "You're a curious one, Audrey." The homeowner noted, without much irritation. "No, I'm not a screenwriter." Audrey nodded, waiting for him to continue. Colin, realising he would have to answer the question after all, sighed. "I used to be. Now I'm more of a teacher, mentor, call it what you will. I review the work of young screenwriters, point out mistakes, highlight successful moments, rewrite unsuccessful scenes and endings. That sort of thing." "Your job sounds interesting," Audrey said thoughtfully. "Well, it only seems that way," Colin said thoughtfully. "Sometimes it drives me crazy. But you'd better tell me if we're going to have lunch." Audrey immediately replied, "Of course. That's why I came to get you." When they entered the house, the homeowner looked around in surprise. "Wow," he said. "Audrey, have you ever worked as a maid before?" "No," the young woman replied. "Cleaning isn't as hard as reviewing a script. It doesn't require any special skills or experience." Colin burst out laughing. Audrey returned home late that evening. The bus ride took an hour. Fortunately, the children were fine. "Well, how did it go?" Tracey asked as soon as Audrey walked in. "Everything's fine," Audrey smiled. "I think I found a real, normal job." "Hooray!" Tracey exclaimed, throwing her arms around Audrey's neck. Audrey laughed and kissed the girl on the cheek. "I knew everything would be fine," Addie said. "And how are things with you?" The children exchanged glances and shrugged. "Boring," Tracey concluded. "All we do is eat and sleep, all day, and play a little." Audrey sighed. "You should be going to school." "It's summer now," Addie reasonably pointed out, "and in the fall you won't be able to enroll us just like that." "I know," Audrey replied, "but I'll think of something. I don't want you to live like this forever." Over the next week, they adjusted to their new routine. Audrey gradually got used to going to bed early and waking up early. She spent less time with the children, but they didn't mind and found ways to keep themselves occupied. As for Colin, he praised her cooking and cleaning, and sometimes, when he was in a good mood, he would share stories about his work. "By the way, where do you live?" he asked her one day. Audrey was taking dishes out of the dishwasher at the time. Her hand trembled, but she managed to hold on to the cup at the last moment. It was Mr. Hartman's favourite cup, and she definitely shouldn't drop it. "Audrey," her employer warned, "be honest. We agreed on that." Audrey wrinkled her nose. "That's a personal question. If you want to ask me personal questions, then I'll ask you personal questions too." Colin's light auburn eyebrows shot up. "Aren't you getting bold after a week of work?" he noted, but then he softened. "All right, fair enough. Tit for tat." "We live in an abandoned house, in the wooden district across the river." "Is that the one they wanted to demolish, but found the soil unsuitable for high-rises?" Audrey nodded. "I see. And you say, 'we.' Who else lives with you? A husband? Boyfriend?" Audrey didn't want to discuss the children, but it was too late to back out now. "I live with 2 kids, Addie and Tracey. They're orphans too. They're like family to me." "Got it. How old are they?" 9 and 12. Colin's face suddenly became thoughtful. Audrey immediately regretted telling him this and decided to distract him. "Why don't your wife and daughter visit you?" she asked abruptly. "The wallet belongs to your daughter, right?" Her boss frowned. Deflecting attention, he said thoughtfully, "Good move. You're not as simple as you seem, my dear." "You said I could ask you personal questions too," she countered. "All right, clever girl, you win this round," Colin sighed. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "My wife and I are divorced. You guessed, right? But Jenny wasn't my daughter. She was my stepdaughter. I married her mother when I was 20, and Norma was 25. Jenny was 7 at the time. I loved Jenny like my own daughter, and you're right about the wallet too. She brought it for me at a flea market with her pocket money and gave it to me for my birthday. She put a coin in it for good luck and asked me to always keep the wallet with me." Colin sighed. "I carried it with me all those years until her death." Audrey felt a chill run down her spine. "Whose death?" she asked hoarsely. The man stared blankly into space. "Jenny's death. She had just turned 18 and finished school. Norma and I saw her off to her prom, and the next morning we found out she had gone for a drive with her classmates. The driver was a boy who had been drinking. The car skidded, spun around and hit a barrier. There were 2 girls and a boy in the back seat. They were injured but survived. The driver and Jenny, who was in the front seat, died instantly." He fell silent. Audrey didn't know what to say or do. "I'm so sorry," she said softly. Colin nodded. "Norma and I took it hard. The worst part was that we each grieved alone. I didn't even notice how my wife and I became strangers to each other." "And you got divorced?" "Yes, 2 years ago." "I'm so sorry." The man nodded again. "The only reason I didn't go crazy was because I worked all the time, and I kept the wallet Jenny gave me. Then one day I decided it was time to let go of the past. I put money in the wallet to make sure it wouldn't come back. But then you showed up." "But if you did not want the purse to be returned to you, why did you put the card with the address in the pocket?" Audrey asked. "It wasn't me. Jenny must have put it there when she gave it back to me. But then I used to lose everything. But I kept her wallet all those years." Audrey shrugged. "Then let's call it fate." "Yeah, I don't have any other explanation." Suddenly her boss narrowed his eyes slyly. "Now that you know more than enough about me, I want to hear your story. How did you, such a young, smart, beautiful and honest creature, end up living like this? Where are your parents, siblings, husband and everyone else?" "I don't know," Audrey answered honestly. "I was very young when I was sent to the orphanage. I don't remember my parents, and the caretakers never told me anything. I ran away when I was 16 and have been wandering ever since. I have no one but Addie and Tracey." "And you've never thought about what you'll do next? While you're young and healthy, you can run around, live in abandoned houses and eat from dumpsters. But what about the future?" Audrey blushed and glanced at the clock. "If we're done for today, Mr. Hartman, I'll go." On the way home, she thought about her employer's words. Of course, Audrey herself knew that her current life was far from ideal, but it always seemed to her that any moment now everything would change. Yet after speaking with Mr. Hartman, she suddenly realized that if she didn't change something right now, she would remain a filthy vagabond for the rest of her life. As she approached the house, she saw that it was quiet and dark. Usually they would light a candle visible through the window, but now their dwelling looked completely abandoned. Could they have gone to bed so early? Audrey wondered. No, they shouldn't have. I even came home a bit earlier today. She called out, "Tracey! Addie!" No one answered. The house was silent. "Kids!" she called again. Then she noticed the chill inside. Usually it was sweltering. In the summer they could have gone without heating the stove at all, but due to the lack of electricity, the stove was the only way to cook food, boil water, or heat water to wash. Today it seemed the stove hadn't been lit, and there was no food on the stove. It was as if the children had been gone for a long time and hadn't returned. Audrey tried to calm herself and think about where they might have gone. For water? They still had some left in their flask. Maybe they ran off to play. But they should have been back by now. They wouldn't have left her without dinner. A search of the house revealed nothing. All their modest belongings were in place. Audrey left the house and walked around the neighbourhood. She visited every homeless person whose shack showed signs of life, but no one knew or saw anything. Audrey barely slept that night. She listened to every sound, hoping the children would return any moment. As soon as dawn broke, she got up and searched the neighbourhood again. Still no sign of them. There was nothing more she could do. It was time to go to work. Maybe Mr. Hartman would have some advice. As she walked to the bus stop, she encountered Dwayne, a man in his 50s, also a local.
"Oh, Audrey, who took your kids yesterday?"
Audrey turned around. "What? You saw that someone took Tracey and Addie?" Dwayne nodded.
"Yeah, a car pulled up during the day. A man and a woman got out and took your kids."
Audrey swallowed hard. "Did they resist?"
Dwayne pondered. "I don't think so. They went willingly."
"Did you happen to catch the car's license plate?"
"No, I saw them from a distance, and I had already been drinking."
"Thank you, Dwayne." At work, Colin noticed her distress.
"You seem strange today. What happened?"
"The children are missing. I came home yesterday and they were gone." She told her boss everything, including her conversation with Dwayne.
"Why didn't you tell me right away? Let's think about how to find them. What are your suspicions?"
"I have two possibilities. Either the child welfare services or the police took them to an orphanage. Or worse, someone bad kidnapped Addie and Tracey. That's what I'm most afraid of." Colin thought for a moment.
"I need to make a call. Wait here,"
he said, leaving the room. He returned a few minutes later.
"I called a friend. He promised to look into it, but couldn't say how long it would take."
Then he prepared breakfast himself, making coffee and sandwiches.
"You need to eat," he told Audrey firmly. "You'll need your strength."
"Okay," she replied without much enthusiasm. After breakfast, the phone rang. Audrey jumped up and looked at Colin. He answered the call, listened intently, and his expression told her there was news.
"Your good theory was right. The police found them. They took them to the hospital to check their condition and so on. And the main news is that their aunt wants to adopt them."
"Aunt?" Audrey was surprised. "Addie and Tracey said they didn't know anything about any relatives. They're orphans like me."
"We'll find out when we get there,"
Colin said gently. Initially, they wouldn't let Audrey see the children, but then Colin intervened. Whether he had connections or was just persuasive, they were allowed in. Addie and Tracey were in a separate room. A stern-looking woman in her 50s, dressed in a severe suit, sat outside the office. She looked at Audrey suspiciously, but let her pass. "Addie! Tracey!" Audrey cried out as she entered the ward. When the children saw their older friend, they jumped up and without a word rushed to her. Audrey embraced them, feeling tears well up in her eyes. "I'm so glad," she sighed. "We thought we'd never see you again," Tracey sobbed. "But I knew you'd find us," Addie insisted stubbornly. Audrey smiled. "How are you? How are they treating you?" The children shrugged. "Fine," Addie replied. "Yesterday afternoon, a woman, the one sitting in the hallway, and some man came to our house. They were calm and said we didn't need to be afraid. They told us we wouldn't be taken to an orphanage. They said there's an aunt who has been looking for us for a long time." "That's wonderful," Audrey said, forcing a smile. "If she's a good person, I'll be happy for you." The children sighed. We wanted to live with you, Tracey said.
Audrey smiled sadly. You're old enough to understand that the life we've been living isn't right, she replied. We can't keep scavenging for food, wearing rags, living in a condemned house, and not going to school. The children looked down but said nothing. At that moment the door opened, and the woman from the hallway entered, accompanied by another woman, tall, elegant, and expensively dressed. Audrey liked her immediately. Hi, I'm Layla. The woman introduced herself, but you can call me Aunt Layla. Soon they were all sitting in the room. Audrey, Colin Hartman, the social worker, Aunt Layla, Addie and Tracey, talking. The last time I saw the children was just before their mother died, Layla said, stroking the children's hair. Addie was 4 and Tracey was just a year old. I remember you, Addie suddenly said. You brought me a big stuffed tiger. Layla smiled and nodded. Then I left. For several years I travelled through South America, living like a nomad, studying the history, culture, and way of life of the locals. I had no permanent address or phone. I was so passionate about those travels. It was only much later, after I met a good man and got married, that I thought about reconnecting with my family. That's when I found out everything. I talked to my husband, and we bought tickets to come here. When I arrived, I found out you had run away. I had to pull some strings to get a proper search started. I'm so glad I found you. Then Layla turned to Audrey. And I must thank you. You've been taking care of my niece and nephew all this time. Audrey is like a sister to us, Tracey exclaimed, and Addie nodded vigorously. Layla smiled. I think it's clear that I want to take custody of my niece and nephew. And Audrey, I'd like you to live with us too. We'll be here for a few months while the paperwork is processed, and then we'll go to my home. My husband and I have a large estate. You can come with us if you like. Audrey glanced back at Colin, who had been standing quietly behind her. Noticing her look, he smiled and nodded approvingly. Thank you for the wonderful offer, Audrey replied. I'm so happy that Addie and Tracey have found such a wonderful aunt. It's the best thing that's happened to us in a long time. I want to stay in touch and visit you kids, but I think it's time for me to build my own life. Audrey's heart ached when she saw the children's faces fall, but she knew she was doing the right thing. An hour later, Colin asked Audrey as they got into his car, Why didn't you go with the children? Audrey sighed. I've been thinking about what you said, she confessed, and how it's time for me to start a normal adult life. She suddenly fell silent and looked out the car window. Aren't we going to your place? How will you get home from my place then? That's why we're going to yours. So, what are your plans for the future? I'll keep working for you and save money, Audrey replied. At the same time, I'll sort out my documents. Maybe later I'll rent an apartment and go to school. As they talked, Audrey didn't notice that they had driven to the abandoned neighbourhood. I can walk from here, she protested, embarrassed at the thought of her boss seeing where she lived. Colin frowned. Don't be silly, Audrey. OK, then turn left at the end of the street. He nodded and drove in the direction she indicated. That's my house, Audrey said sullenly. She got out of the car, slammed the door and walked away, without looking back or even saying goodbye to her boss, let alone thanking him. As she opened the door and stepped inside, ready to collapse on the bed and burst into tears, she heard Colin's voice behind her. Your place is quite cosy. I expected worse. Audrey jumped and turned around. Her boss was calmly surveying her home, as if it were an ordinary house, not the dilapidated shack of 3 homeless children that should have been demolished years ago. You heat with a stove? And where do you get firewood? He asked. Dividing the territory into separate zones is original. Why did you follow me? Audrey asked angrily.
He looked at her with surprise, as if the answer was obvious.
You said you wanted to start a new life and rent a place. Why not stay with me for a while? You won't have to spend money on commuting, and you won't have to get up at 6 in the morning.
The girl looked at him suspiciously. Mr. Hartman, are you offering me to move in with you?
Temporarily, Audrey, temporarily. Don't think I'm offering you my heart, he said with a playful smile.
I would never think that, she retorted indignantly.
Her boss smiled even wider. So, am I too old for you? He teased.
No, not at all, she replied. Audrey suddenly realised he was deliberately trying to embarrass her. He seemed to find the whole situation amusing. I can't live with you, that's all, she declared.
Why not? Think about it. How does it look? He asked, feigning thoughtfulness. Living in a condemned house without electricity, heating or plumbing seems normal, but living at my place doesn't. If you don't trust me, then...
Of course I trust you, Audrey interrupted, exasperated. Her head was starting to ache from the argument. All right, she said. I'll pack my things. It'll take 5 minutes. She didn't have much, just clothes and shoes. She left the old dishes and bed linens behind, knowing the children wouldn't need them, and refusing to bring such things into her boss's home.
Packed in 10 minutes,
Colin commented as she got into his car.
The perfect woman.
And you're quite the wit, she retorted.
I am, he agreed humbly, and started the car.
At Colin's house, Audrey stayed in what she initially thought was the guest room. Later she realised it had once belonged to his stepdaughter. The room had a bed, wardrobe, desk, computer chair, mirror and dressing table. At first it felt strange to wake up in this house. However, Audrey quickly grew accustomed to the comforts. Within days, she no longer marvelled at having her own shower and toilet, a luxury after a year of washing under an outdoor shower or in a basin. It was wonderful not having to wake up before dawn for work. Now, Audrey woke up at 8:30, showered, and went downstairs to prepare breakfast for 2. By then, Colin would join her, and they would eat together before he went to work, and she cleaned the house. With practice, she finished her chores early, leaving plenty of spare time. I finished everything. Maybe there are more tasks? Audrey asked her boss daily. He would send her to the store, the post office, or the market. But one day he said,
You're an unusual employee, Audrey. Normal people are happy when there's no work, but you go looking for it.
I just can't do nothing.
Then use this time for yourself. Work on restoring your documents. Think about which college you want to attend, and everything else.
Colin even found an old laptop for Audrey and showed her how to use it.
This will speed things up, he said.
3 months later, Audrey and Colin stood at the airport, saying goodbye to Layla, Addie and Tracey. Audrey hugged them, finding it difficult to believe she wouldn't see them again for a long time. Come visit us sometime, Tracey blurted out. I definitely will, someday, Audrey replied. They embraced one last time. Audrey and Colin waved goodbye to the children until they disappeared behind the security checkpoint with Layla.
How are you feeling?
Colin asked as they got into the car. I'm okay, Audrey replied. I've thought a lot about how things would turn out for all of us, and this is such a good outcome for Tracey and Addie that I couldn't have imagined it even in my wildest dreams. Now I can just be happy for them.
You had to grow up too fast, Colin said. Girls your age shouldn't have to think about such serious things. Most of your peers are studying at university and living happy, carefree lives.
You sound like an old man, Audrey teased.
I'm old enough to be your father, he replied.
I don't know. You look more like my older brother.
Anyway, I think we have a great friendship. Let's go grab something to eat."
"I can cook at home," Audrey protested.
"Relax," Colin said cheerfully. "Consider today your day off."
"But I hardly do anything all day. I cook a little and clean, which takes a couple of hours at most."
"You're right," he admitted. "You work criminally little. We need to fix that immediately." Seeing her alarmed expression, he laughed. "Don't look so scared. I have an idea."
He shared his plan over lunch.
"I've been offered a consulting job on a film shoot. They have the main script, but need help with the details. I'll be overseeing the entire shooting process and need an assistant. What do you say?"
"I'm in," Audrey agreed.
"As if I gave you a choice,"
he teased. Audrey enjoyed being on the film set. The atmosphere was unique and chaotic, with people rushing around constantly. On her first day, she was afraid of being knocked over and stayed close to Colin. He smiled, seeing her frightened face.
"Don't worry," he said during a break. "I almost lost my mind the first time I was here. You'll get used to it in a couple of days."
"I'm scared," Audrey admitted. "They're all crazy here."
"They are," Colin agreed. "And you'll become just like them soon."
Audrey looked at him sceptically, but he seemed serious.
"You haven't seen me in action yet," he added.
At first, Audrey didn't understand what he meant, but then Colin had a heated argument with the director. She had never seen him so angry.
"You called me to turn this nonsense into something resembling a film?" Colin shouted. "And that's what I'm doing," the director retorted. "I know best how this scene should look."
What surprised Audrey the most was how everyone else on set, actors, assistants, makeup artists, cameramen, seemed unfazed, as if nothing unusual was happening. 15 minutes later, during a break, Audrey saw Colin and the director chatting calmly by the coffee machine. "Is this normal?" she asked one of the cameramen. He barely understood her question.
"You mean the arguing? Yeah, it happens. You can't make a movie without a few fights."
A month later, Audrey realised she had grown accustomed to this life. She could hardly remember being homeless and scavenging for food. Now she had a job, 2 in fact, and plans to attend college the following year and find her own apartment. Strangely, Audrey didn't want to move out. Sometimes she even wondered if she was in love with her boss. She had never been in love before, so she had nothing to compare it to, but she knew that she couldn't help but smile every time she heard his footsteps in the morning as he came downstairs for breakfast. She could listen for hours as he explained to the film crew how and why a scene should be done a certain way. And she thought she had never seen anyone more attractive. Sometimes she even imagined that Colin looked at her in a special way, but she quickly dismissed such bold fantasies. A man like Colin Hartman would never be interested in someone like her. He was only being kind, and she happened to be there for him during those gloomy months. Now she saw him flourish with each day spent on the film set. When it was all over, she would go to college and move away. Colin would forget about her in a matter of days. The thought saddened her, but Audrey decided to enjoy the time they had together now. They spent almost every moment together, and apart from him, she only interacted with colleagues at work and occasionally called Addie and Tracey. They were doing well, exploring the vast estate, enjoying the local cuisine, and appreciating the mild climate. They also liked Layla's husband, who was kind and welcoming.
"How are the kids?" Colin asked after Audrey hung up.
"They're doing well. They send their regards," she replied.
"Thank you," Colin said, then hesitated before asking, "Would you like to go out for dinner tonight?"
Audrey looked at him in surprise. "I've already made stuffed cabbage rolls with mashed potatoes. Don't you like them?" she asked. He smiled gently.
"I like everything you cook. Let's save them for tomorrow. I feel like going out tonight."
"All right," Audrey agreed. Colin took her to a small but cosy restaurant. Audrey worried she would be embarrassed. having never been to a restaurant before, but they were seated at a private table, separated from the main dining area by semi-transparent curtains. With Colin by her side, she felt comfortable and at ease.
"What would you like?"
he asked. Audrey scanned the menu. "I don't know, maybe you could choose," she suggested.
"All right," he agreed.
After they ordered, Audrey looked around. "I like it here," she admitted.
"I'm glad. We should come here more often,"
Colin said. "That's not what I meant," Audrey clarified.
"But it's what I meant,"
he insisted, looking at her with a slight frown but a smile. Audrey blushed and looked down. "I don't want to get used to this," she said softly.
"To what?"
Colin asked, confused. "Spending so much time with you, getting attached, thinking it will last," she explained. Colin opened his mouth to respond, but a sharp female voice interrupted them. "So, it's true? I thought it was just a rumour." Audrey looked up and recognised the woman as Norma, Colin's ex-wife, and the mother of his late stepdaughter, Jenny.
"Good evening, Norma," Colin greeted her calmly. "What are you doing here?"
"I came for dinner and ran into you," Norma replied, looking at Audrey with disdain. "I've heard rumours that you're having an affair with your young assistant, and that she even lives with you. I didn't believe you would stoop so low. Well, I guess breaking up with me and being alone got to you." Colin straightened in his chair.
"Audrey works for me, and our relationship is strictly professional. Besides, it's none of your business."
"None of my business," Norma repeated. "We were married for years. You considered Jenny your daughter." Colin sighed heavily.
"I loved Jenny with all my heart, you know that."
"And what about me?" Norma demanded. Audrey couldn't bear it any longer. "I'll go," she said quickly, standing up. "You two need to talk." She rushed out of the restaurant, pulling on her coat as she went. She had the house keys and money for a taxi, but she wondered if she should return to Colin's home. Where else could she go? Back to the streets? No, she had a job, a place to live, and opportunities for the future. She couldn't throw it all away over something so trivial. And honestly, Colin was not trivial to her. Audrey realised that he occupied a significant place in her heart, more than a boss or even a good friend should. But to him, she was practically nobody, especially now that his ex-wife had reappeared. Back at the house, Audrey felt the emptiness without Colin. She washed up and went to bed, but couldn't sleep. She heard Colin return 2 hours later. The next day, neither of them mentioned what had happened. Colin seemed lost in thought, and Audrey assumed Norma had proposed they get back together. She tried not to show her distress, but inside she was overwhelmed with pain and longing. Why was life so unfair? Why did fate take away the people she cared about as soon as they entered her life? At least the children were happy, she thought, trying to find some comfort in that. And Colin will probably be happy with his Norma, but that doesn't make it any easier for Audrey. Yet she will endure. "You've been strange lately," Colin said to her. "You've lost weight. You're always silent. It's like you're thinking about something. Has someone upset you? Maybe me?" "Everything is fine. I'm just tired from work." "Do you want me to give you a short break? You can stay home for a week, or you'll wear yourself out. You won't need to cook or clean either. I'll manage." He wants to be gentle with me before Norma arrives and shows who the real mistress of this house is. No way. I'll leave before she gets here, Audrey thought, and said aloud, "No, I don't want a break." "You are the most stubborn girl in the world, you know that." "As if you're any different," Audrey said. "You're barely standing on your feet, but you'll still argue with the director until the end." "It's all because of you. When I see how you look at me, I find strength from somewhere." "You said I need to gain experience, so I always look at you and I listen intently, to how you shout at everyone." Colin laughed. "What a pity. I was hoping it was because of my irresistible charm, charisma, and oratory skills." "Why is he teasing me like this?" Audrey thought. "He must know that I like him. How cruel to laugh at my feelings, especially now he's about to reunite with his ex-wife." She proudly lifted her head and replied, "Anyway, we won't be working together much longer. The filming will end soon."
"It will end," Colin agreed. "But we'll still be together, at least in my house."
"But I'm going to enroll to the college, so I won't be able to work for you and study at the same time. I'll live in the dormitory as soon as I enroll, and if you need me to leave your house earlier, I'll leave earlier." Colin raised his eyebrows in surprise and wanted to say something, but he didn't have time. The break was over, and everyone was called back to the set. A few days later, they had their first real day off.
"So, where should we go?" Colin asked cheerfully.
Audrey hesitated. "I don't know. I haven't done a thorough cleaning in a long time."
"Forget about it. The house is clean. We're hardly ever here anyway. Let's have some fun instead. Especially since our last evening was ruined before it even started."
"All right," Audrey sighed. They were just discussing where to go when Colin received a message. He looked at the screen and sighed. How does she do it? Then he looked at Audrey and smiled guiltily. "I'm sorry, dear. Our outing is cancelled for today. My ex-wife is coming over. It seems we're about to have an interesting conversation." "I understand everything," she replied. "I'll be in my room." There she sat on the bed and pondered. Colin had such a strange smile. They're probably going to make up and decide to live together now. So what am I waiting for here? She decidedly stood up and began calmly packing her things. Downstairs, Norma's voice could already be heard. She arrived quickly. Audrey didn't want to leave demonstratively while the former spouses were talking. She decided to wait until everything quieted down and then slip out of the house quietly. Today she could spend the night in a hostel, and tomorrow she would think about a more suitable dwelling. Finally, the voices fell silent. Audrey waited a few more minutes to be sure, then took her suitcase, peeked out of the room, and headed for the front door. "And where do you think you're going?" Colin's voice suddenly sounded behind her. He was standing in the doorway with a cup in his hands. "What's with the secret runaway? Did I offend you? Or do you have a secret admirer, and you're secretly running away to him, not daring to break my heart?" "I just didn't want to interfere with your reunion with your ex-wife." "What?" Colin seemed genuinely surprised. "Are you jealous of me?" Audrey felt herself blushing. "Well, I never," she said in a breaking voice. "I have better things to do." "Then tell me what's going on. I thought we were getting along great, and then suddenly you're packing your things and trying to leave without even telling me." "You and Norma are planning to get back together, and I don't want to get in your way. In the restaurant you talked for 2 hours, and after that, you weren't yourself. You kept walking around thinking about something, and today she came," Audrey said, almost crying. "Women, you'll drive me crazy," he sighed. "There's nothing between me and Norma. That day in the restaurant, she accidentally saw us, and after you left, we just talked. She even cried because of Jenny. I sat with her and sent her home." "And today?" Audrey asked quietly. "Today she came to apologize. She even wanted to talk to you, but I said it was better not to. She left." Audrey looked at him disbelievingly. "You're not planning to get back together with her?" He smiled. "No. Besides, I've liked another girl for a long time." "Who? You can't mean me, because I'm homeless, poor and uneducated." "Well, you know how to choose words. But you forgot to mention how wonderful, smart, honest, kind, caring, beautiful
and strong-spirited you are.
So, you really like me?
Like you? I've been in love with you for a long time."
She blushed. "Why didn't you say anything?"
"Because I didn't think such a young and beautiful girl could like a old, boring man like me."
Audrey laughed and suddenly threw her arms around his neck and kissed him.
"It seems you're not as smart as I thought,"
she said after the kiss.
"You also took too long to notice the obvious. I hope together we won't miss anything important." Colin hugged her and pulled her close.
"Indeed. Now we'll have to try harder."